So far, we've learned 3 ways to solve quadratic equations. We learned about factoring, we learned how to complete the square, we learned how to solve the quadratic by taking the square root, and now we're going to learn maybe the most famous way of solving a quadratic, which is by using the quadratic formula. Okay, so quadratic formula, it's special. Let's look at the quadratic formula. So the quadratic formula goes like this. Negative b plus minus square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So in a second, I will explain where the a, b, and c come from, but the first thing to pay attention to is this plus minus. So that plus minus means that you have to do 2 versions of the quadratic formula. One with plus, so you do negative b plus square root of b squared minus 4ac. Let's fix that, all over 2a. That gives you one solution. And then you also have to do negative b minus square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a, and that gives you your second solution. So that's what that plus minus means. Okay, now let's talk about what are a, b, and c. So the a, b, and c are referring to the coefficients of a quadratic in standard form. So remember, standard form looks like this. Let's fix that. What I meant to write was ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. So that's the standard form of a quadratic. And so the a is always the coefficient of x squared, the b is the coefficient of x, and c is the constant. It's the number by itself. So let's look at our first equation that we're going to solve using the quadratic formula. So let's say we have x squared minus 4x plus 3 equals 0. So the first part for us is to identify a, b, and c. So a is the coefficient of x squared. In this case, it's that invisible 1. B is the coefficient of x, in this case minus 4. C is the constant, the number at the end, in this case 3. So let's write out that quadratic formula to remind ourselves again. Negative b plus minus square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Okay, so now remember, you have to do 2 versions, one with plus, one with minus. So let's start with the plus. So first we have to do negative b. So negative b would be negative 4 plus square root b squared. So negative 4 squared minus 4 a1 c3. Let's extend that square root all over 2a, 2 times 1. Okay, so now we have to simplify that. So negative 4 is just 4 plus square root. Negative 4 squared is 16 minus 4 times 1 is 4 times 3 is 12 all over 2 times 1, which is 2. Perfect. So we can actually erase this. All right, let's keep simplifying that. Okay, we'll give ourselves some more space to work with. Okay, let's go to blue. So 4 plus square root of 16 minus 12. So 4 plus square root. Well, 16 minus 12 is 4 all over 2. Let's keep working. Let's erase this. Perfect. All right, so we're going to have to zoom out a little bit more. Okay, so let's go back to the red color. So square root of 4 is 2. So we get 4. Square root of 4 is the 2. So plus 2 over 2. Okay, so 4 plus 2 is 6. 6 divided by 2 is 3. And there we have it. We have our first answer. Now remember how we talk about the square root of 4? Well, you also know that square root of 4 is negative 2. And so that's why we have to do the other version, or the minus, using the quadratic formula. Okay, so we're going to begin that right here. Let's do the minus version. So that's negative 4. Okay, before we did plus, remember here, we did plus. So now we are going to change it to minus square root of negative 4 squared minus 4 times 1 times 3. Okay, all over 2a, which is 2 times 1. All right, well, at the top, we have, let's go with green. So we have negative 4, which is 4, minus, now we know that negative 4 squared is 16, and then 16 minus 4 times 3 is 12. So 16 minus 12 is 4. So we know this is going to be square root of 4 all over 2 times 1, which was 2. Okay, so the next step is to do square root of 4 is 2. So now we have 4 minus 2 over 2. So 4 minus 2 is 2. Divided by 2 equals 1. And so now we have our second solution to the equation. So our first answer, or our first solution, is x equals 3. And our second solution is x equals 1. All right, let's look at one more example of solving a equation with the quadratic formula. Let's look at this equation. 2x squared plus 9x plus 10 equals 0. Okay, so here's a quadratic, and we're going to solve it using the quadratic formula. Let's actually begin by zooming in, and then we'll zoom out as we solve the problem. So first we have to identify the a, b, and the c. So the a is the coefficient of x squared. The b is the coefficient of x. And c is the constant. So in the beginning, it's helpful to keep writing out the quadratic formula until you remember it. So I'll still write out negative b plus minus square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. All right, so let's begin. So the first thing is we need negative b, so in this case negative 9, plus minus. Now that you already know like what the plus minus means, I showed you this, how the plus means you have to do it with the plus sign, and then the minus means you also have to solve it with the minus. So now that you know that, I won't write it out as two separate like flows. Let's just keep it together. So negative 9 plus minus, zoom in, okay, square root, b squared, so that's 9 squared, minus 4, a is 2, so times 2, and c is 10 times 10, all over 2a, 2 times 2. All right, let's keep going. So equal sign. So negative 9 plus minus square root. All right, so 9 squared is 81 minus 4 times 2 is 8 times 10 is 80. All over 4. All right, let's keep going. So now, second line, I'm starting over here. So I have negative 9 plus minus 81 minus 80 is 1. Well, that's convenient. So negative 9 plus minus square root of 1 all over 4. Okay, and so now I'm going to break up the problem into the plus minus solution. Let's go with blue for our first solution. So that's negative 9. I'm going to do the plus square root of 1 over 4. So that's negative 9 plus 1 is negative 8 over 4 equals negative 2. So that was our first solution. Now let's go with, what haven't we used yet? How about orange? Okay, so now we'll do negative 9. But instead of doing the plus, we're going to do the minus 1 over 4. So negative 9 minus 1 is negative 10 over 4. And that's going to give us a decimal, which works out to negative 2.5. 10 divided by 4 is also 5 over 2, which is negative 2.5. If you want to write that as a fraction or a decimal, you can. So we have our two solutions. And now finally, we can write out our two solutions. So let's go with purple. Let's go with x equals negative 2 and x equals negative 2.5. Okay. So there's us with the quadratic formula. Let's do another one, but this one will make it a little bit more trickier. So let's look at our quadratic equation. Let's start with 2x squared minus 10x plus 13 equals 5. So right away you should notice that this equation doesn't equal 0. And see, that's the problem. Your equation has to equal 0 if you're going to use the quadratic formula. So we have to make it equal to 0, and we're going to do that by subtracting 5 from each side. So now our equation is going to become 2x squared minus 10x. 13 minus 5 is 8, so plus 8 equals 0. So I'm going to identify my a, b, and c. A, b, so be careful. The b is a negative 10, and c is 8. And so now when I write out my quadratic formula, negative b plus minus square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Okay, so I'm going to zoom out a little bit so we have more space. Perfect. Let's get blue and let's start writing out our problem. So for us, negative b, negative 10 plus minus square root of b squared minus 4a, oops, no, I didn't mean to write a, because our a is 2, so 4 times 2 times c, which is 8 for us. Let's extend that square root all over 2 times 2. All right, let's keep simplifying. Let's switch back to green. So negative 10 is 10 plus minus square root. Negative 10 squared is 100 minus 4 times 2 is 8. 8 times 8 is 64 all over 4. Keep going. So that's 10 plus minus square root of 36 over 4. Let's zoom out a little bit more. So going down, we get, switch to blue. So that's 10 plus minus square root of 36 is 6 over 4. I'm going to zoom out a little bit more. Okay, and so now we have to do our two branches, the positive and the negative. So that would be 10, let's do the plus first, plus 6 over 4. So 10 plus 6 is 16 divided by 4 equals a positive 4. And then we also have to do the minus. So that would be 10 minus 6 over 4. 10 minus 6 is 4. So 4 divided by 4 equals 1. So we have our first solution of 4 and our second solution of 1. So we can write it out. X equals 4 and x equals 1. There you have it. So remember, if you're going to use the quadratic formula, your equation has to equal 0. If it doesn't, you have to rewrite it and get it equal to 0.